I am Amanda Wilson, 34, and after 7 loyal years at TechVision Corp., I was blindsided by a layoff that shattered my world. When I asked HR to discuss my severance package, their response was ice cold. "This is standard policy, non-negotiable," Marcus from HR declared, sliding the insulting offer across the table. Little did they know, buried in my contract was a clause about immediate share vesting that would change everything. Before I tell you how I turned this corporate betrayal into my greatest victory, let me know where you are watching from and click that subscribe button. Trust me, you will want to stick around to see how I exposed their unfair policies and got the compensation I deserved. My journey with TechVision began 7 years ago when the company was still considered an exciting up-and-comer in the enterprise software industry. I had just completed my MBA with a focus on technology management and was eager to join a company where I could grow and make an impact. TechVision impressed me during the interview process with their innovative product line and what seemed like a genuine commitment to employee development. The campus was everything a tech professional could dream of back then. Open-concept workspaces, well-stocked break rooms, and regular company events designed to foster collaboration and creativity. During my orientation, the CEO Thomas Reynolds gave a speech about how employees were the heart of TechVision and how the company was committed to growing together with its talent. I remember feeling so inspired and certain that I had made the right choice turning down offers from more established companies. My first role was as a project coordinator where I managed timelines and resources for one of our smaller product teams. I threw myself into the work regularly, staying late to ensure deadlines were met and deliverables exceeded expectations. My manager Rachel noticed my dedication and began giving me opportunities to present directly to clients and lead internal meetings. By my second year, I was promoted to project manager and given responsibility for our emerging healthcare software division. The product was struggling when I took over, but through careful planning and by rebuilding client relationships, we turned it into one of the company's fastest-growing revenue streams. The quarterly leadership meeting where I presented our turnaround strategy remains one of my proudest professional moments. The CFO, Patricia Clark herself, sent me a personal email congratulating me on the division's performance. My third year brought another promotion to senior project manager, now overseeing 3 product lines and a team of 15 people. We consistently hit our targets and received the highest client satisfaction scores in the company. I instituted mentorship programs for junior staff and created detailed process documentation that became the standard across all project teams. The company featured my leadership approach in the corporate newsletter, and I was invited to speak at industry conferences as a representative of TechVision's innovative management practices. It was during my 4th year that TechVision rolled out its enhanced employee stock option program. As a senior manager, I was granted options that would vest over a 4-year period with accelerated vesting available under certain conditions. The HR presentation explained how this program was designed to reward loyalty and give employees ownership in the company's success. I remember being impressed by the generosity of the program and seeing it as yet another sign that my future at TechVision was secure and promising. Over the next 3 years, I continued to advance, eventually becoming the Director of Project Management for the entire enterprise division. My teams consistently delivered projects on or under budget, and several innovations we implemented saved the company millions in development costs. I built strong relationships across departments and was known as someone who could solve complex problems and navigate corporate politics to get things done. I turned down headhunter calls regularly. When a competitor offered me a position with a 20% salary increase, I declined without hesitation. TechVision felt like home, and I was invested in our collective success. I had accumulated substantial stock options by this point, which the company regularly reminded us were increasing in value as our market position strengthened. The first signs of trouble appeared about 18 months ago. Quarterly earnings calls began featuring terms like market headwinds and strategic repositioning. Budget meetings became tenser, with more emphasis on cost-cutting than innovation. Still, our division was performing well, and my director, Victor, assured me that we were considered essential to the company's future. Despite the growing uncertainty, I doubled down on my commitment. When team morale began to waver as rumors of potential layoffs circulated, I organized additional team events at my own expense. I created contingency plans for our projects to ensure we could maintain quality even with reduced resources. On several occasions, I personally covered for team members who needed time off for family emergencies, working 16-hour days to keep our deliverables on track. Just 3 weeks before my layoff, I had a one-on-one meeting with Victor where he reviewed my performance and discussed potential growth opportunities. He mentioned the possibility of a vice president position opening up in the next year and suggested I would be a strong candidate. He acknowledged the company was going through challenges but assured me the executive team valued my contributions and saw me as part of TechVision's long-term future. That is why the meeting invite from HR that appeared in my calendar late on a Thursday afternoon caught me completely by surprise. The subject simply read meeting with HR and finance with no additional context. I sent Victor a quick message asking if he knew what the meeting was about, but received no response. Looking back, his silence should have been my first warning that something was very wrong. Friday morning arrived with a sense of foreboding I could not shake. I dressed more formally than usual, somehow sensing that I needed to armor myself for whatever was coming. The meeting was scheduled for 10 in the morning in a conference room I rarely visited on the executive floor. When I arrived, HR Director Marcus Fleming and CFO Patricia Clark were already seated, their expressions professionally neutral, in a way that immediately sent ice through my veins. "Thank you for joining us, Amanda," Marcus began as I took a seat across from them. "We have called you here today to discuss some organizational changes that are taking place effective immediately." Patricia nodded, her eyes briefly meeting mine before looking down at her tablet. "As you may be aware, TechVision is implementing a strategic restructuring to address current market conditions and position the company for future growth." The corporate doublespeak was unmistakable. Before Marcus even said the words, I knew what was happening. My 7 years of dedication, late nights, and sacrificed weekends were about to be erased with a single sentence. "Unfortunately, your position has been eliminated as part of this restructuring," Marcus continued, his voice devoid of any emotion. "This decision is not a reflection of your performance, which has been exemplary. It is purely a business decision made at the highest levels of the organization." Despite having sensed what was coming, the actual words hit me like a physical blow. My hands gripped the arms of my chair as I struggled to maintain my composure. Questions raced through my mind. Why me? What about Victor's assurances? What about my team? The projects currently in progress? Patricia slid a folder across the table. "This contains information about your severance package and benefit continuation. As per company policy, you will receive 2 weeks of pay for each year of service, which amounts to 14 weeks of severance pay. Your health benefits will continue through the end of the month, after which you will be eligible for COBRA." The clinical way they discussed the termination of my career was almost as painful as the termination itself. 7 years reduced to a simple mathematical formula, 2 weeks per year. No consideration for my level, my contributions, or the promises that had been made. I took a deep breath. Given my position and contributions to the company, I would like to discuss the terms of the severance package. 2 weeks per year seems low for a director-level employee who has consistently exceeded expectations. Marcus's expression hardened slightly. "I understand this is difficult, Amanda, but the severance formula is standard policy and non-negotiable for all employees affected by this restructuring. We are applying the same terms across the board, regardless of position or tenure." "But surely there is room for discussion based on individual circumstances," I pressed, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have led projects that have generated millions in revenue and cost savings." Patricia interjected, her tone firm. "The decision and terms have been finalized at the board level. We appreciate your contributions, but we cannot make exceptions to the policy." Marcus slid another document across the table. "We will need you to sign this severance agreement today. It includes standard confidentiality and non-disparagement clauses, as well as a release of claims against the company." The message was clear: take it or leave it. My shock was quickly being replaced by a burning sense of injustice. But I knew this was neither the time nor place to fight. I needed to understand exactly what I was being offered and what rights I might be signing away. "I will need time to review the agreement before signing," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded, despite the turmoil inside. Marcus frowned. "We were hoping to conclude this today, but you have 5 business days to review and sign. However, please note that your system access will be terminated immediately, and security will escort you to collect your personal belongings." The escort by security was the final humiliation. Randy, a security guard I had chatted with almost daily for years now, stood awkwardly by the conference room door, unable to meet my eyes. Together we walked through the open office where my team sat, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock as they realized what was happening. I held my head high as I packed my desk, aware of the whispers and stares from around the office. Several colleagues approached to express their disbelief and offer support, but Randy politely kept them at a distance following protocol. Lauren, my closest friend at the company, managed to slip me her personal phone number on a sticky note with a whispered, "Call me later." The walk through the lobby and out the front doors of the building I had entered with such hope and enthusiasm 7 years earlier was surreal. Randy, breaking protocol, briefly squeezed my shoulder before turning back inside, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot with a box of desk plants, family photos, and a coffee mug that read "World's Best Boss" given to me by my team. Last Christmas. The weekend that followed was a blur of emotions. Friday night, I sat in shock on my couch, the untouched severance papers on my coffee table seeming to mock me. Saturday brought waves of anger and betrayal that had me pacing my apartment, alternating between rage at the company and self-doubt about my own value. By Sunday, panic had set in as I calculated my monthly expenses against the inadequate severance offer. My mortgage payment alone would eat up a significant portion of the 14 weeks of pay. I had some savings, but not enough to feel secure in what could be an extended job search. The tech industry was experiencing widespread layoffs, and director-level positions were few and far between. The stock options I had been counting on as part of my long-term financial planning were now in question as the severance paperwork made no mention of what would happen to my unvested shares. Monday morning, instead of heading to my office to lead my weekly team meeting, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the severance agreement with growing concern. The language was dense with legal terminology, and several clauses seemed deliberately vague, particularly regarding my stock options. The knot in my stomach tightened as I realized I needed professional help to understand exactly what I was being asked to sign away. With the severance agreement spread across my kitchen table, I began a methodical review of not just this document, but all the paperwork I had accumulated during my time at TechVision. My employment contract, the stock option grant letters, the employee handbook benefit statements, performance reviews, everything that might give me some leverage or protection in this situation. The severance agreement itself was 14 pages of dense legal language, much of it seemingly designed to protect TechVision from any future claims I might make. There were clauses about confidentiality, non-disparagement, and a comprehensive release of all claims against the company. The compensation section confirmed the 14 weeks of pay, but was noticeably silent on the matter of my stock options. I reached out to my friend Jessica, who worked in HR at another tech company, hoping for some insight. We met for coffee that afternoon, and her reaction to the severance terms was immediate. 2 weeks per year for a director. That is well below industry standard, Amanda, she said, frowning as she reviewed the documents. Most companies offer at least a month per year for leadership positions, sometimes more depending on the circumstances. Her confirmation of what I already suspected fueled my determination to fight this. What about the stock options? There is nothing here about what happens to them. Jessica flipped through the pages again. That is concerning. Typically, there would be clear language about accelerated vesting or a cash payment in lieu of options. The silence here suggests they are hoping you will just walk away from potentially significant value. By the end of our conversation, Jessica had convinced me to consult with an employment attorney before signing anything. She recommended Benjamin Mercer, a lawyer who specialized in executive compensation and severance negotiations. 2 days later, I sat in Benjamin's office, a sleek space in a downtown high-rise that spoke of success and confidence. Benjamin himself was in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing as he reviewed my documents. The severance package itself is indeed substandard for your position, he confirmed, echoing Jessica's assessment. But there is something more concerning here that I want to look into. For the next hour, Benjamin methodically cross-referenced my employment contract, stock option agreements, and the company's equity incentive plan documents. His expression changed subtly as he found what he was looking for, and he turned the document toward me, pointing to a clause I had never noticed before. Section 7. Point 3. Of the equity incentive plan, he set his finger, underlining the key sentence. In the event of involuntary termination without cause, All unvested shares shall immediately vest as of the termination date. I stared at the words, not quite comprehending their significance at first. What does that mean exactly? Benjamin leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It means, Miss Wilson, that contrary to what HR might have led you to believe, you are entitled to immediate vesting of all your outstanding stock options upon termination. Given your position and tenure, I imagine that represents significant value. My mind raced as I calculated the potential value. Over the years, I had accumulated options on 20,000 shares with roughly 60% still unvested. At the current stock price of $78 per share, the unvested portions alone were worth over $900,000, far exceeding the roughly $30,000 in severance pay they had offered. They never mentioned this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The HR director and CFO both told me the severance terms were non-negotiable and standard for everyone. Benjamin's expression hardened slightly. That is deeply concerning. Either they were unaware of this provision, which suggests incompetence, or they deliberately withheld this information, which suggests something far worse. The implications were staggering. If this had happened to me, what about other employees who had been laid off in this restructuring? How many had signed away their rights without knowing what they were entitled to? At Benjamin's suggestion, I began discreetly reaching out to former colleagues who had been let go in recent months. The pattern that emerged was disturbing. None of them had been informed about the accelerated vesting clause, and all had signed the severance agreements without questioning the status of their stock options. Martin, a former engineering manager who had been with the company for 5 years, was particularly upset when I shared the clause with him. They told me my unvested options were simply forfeited, he said during our phone call. I signed the agreement 3 weeks ago. Is it too late? The more people I spoke with, the clearer it became that this was not an oversight but a deliberate strategy. TechVision was systematically denying laid-off employees their rightful compensation, likely saving millions of dollars in the process. Armed with this information, Benjamin and I developed a strategy. First, he would send a formal letter to TechVision, citing the relevant clause and demanding immediate vesting of my shares. If they refused, we would escalate to legal action, potentially including a class action on behalf of all affected former employees. Be prepared for pushback, Benjamin warned as we finalized our approach. Companies rarely concede such significant financial obligations without a fight. They may claim the clause does not apply in your case, or that it has been superseded by other agreements. I nodded a newfound determination, replacing the shock and betrayal of the previous days. I am ready. This is not just about the money anymore. It is about holding them accountable for how they treat people who gave years of their lives to the company. Benjamin prepared the letter that afternoon, a 3-page document that methodically laid out the facts, cited the relevant contractual provisions, and demanded immediate vesting of all my outstanding options. The letter concluded with a deadline of 5 business days for TechVision to confirm compliance before we would pursue further legal remedies. As I left his office that day, letter in hand, I felt a shift in my perspective. The victimhood and helplessness of the layoff was being replaced by something else, a sense of purpose and righteous indignation. TechVision had tried to take advantage of me and countless others during one of the most vulnerable moments of our professional lives. Now they would have to answer for it. The letter was delivered by courier the next morning, addressed directly to Marcus Fleming with copies to Patricia Clark and the company's general counsel. Then began the tense waiting period, wondering how they would respond and steeling myself for the confrontation to come. 3 days after sending the letter, I received a terse email from Marcus Fleming requesting a meeting to discuss the concerns raised in your recent correspondence. The message copied Patricia Clark, General Counsel Stephanie Winters, and my former director Victor Reyes, whose inclusion surprised me given his complete silence since my termination. Benjamin advised me to insist on his presence at the meeting and to request a specific agenda in advance. TechVision's response was immediate and revealing they preferred to keep the discussion informal but reluctantly agreed to Benjamin's attendance. They refused to provide an agenda, stating only that they wished to clarify misunderstandings regarding the severance agreement. We scheduled the meeting for the following Monday at TechVision headquarters. The weekend was tense as I prepared with Benjamin, reviewing potential arguments and counter-arguments, practicing keeping my emotions in check while still firmly advocating for myself. They will try to intimidate you, Benjamin warned. They will use corporate language to confuse the issues and may attempt to make you feel disloyal or ungrateful. Remember, this is business, not personal, even though it feels intensely personal to you. Monday morning arrived with a mixture of anxiety and determination coursing through me. I chose my outfit carefully, a charcoal gray suit that projected confidence and professionalism. Benjamin met me in the lobby of TechVision's building, his presence reassuringly solid beside me. The security guard recognized me but still required me to sign in as a visitor, a small but pointed reminder that I was no longer part of this company. We were escorted to a conference room on the executive floor, the same one where I had received the news of my termination just 2 weeks earlier. Marcus, Patricia, Stephanie, and Victor were already seated when we entered. Their expressions ranged from Marcus's thinly veiled annoyance to Victor's evident discomfort. Only Stephanie, the general counsel, maintained perfect professional composure, her face revealing nothing as she nodded in greeting. "Thank you for coming in today," Amanda Marcus began after introductions were complete. "We wanted to address the letter we received from your attorney and clear up what we believe is a misinterpretation of company policy." Benjamin interjected smoothly. "Before we begin, I want to clarify that we are here to discuss the specific contractual provision regarding accelerated vesting of stock options upon involuntary termination, as clearly stated in Section 7.3 of the Equity Incentive Plan. This is not a matter of policy interpretation, but of contractual obligation." Stephanie leaned forward slightly. "We are familiar with the provision Mr. Mercer is referencing. However, the applicability of that clause in the current restructuring scenario is what we wish to discuss." What followed was 45 minutes of what I can only describe as corporate gaslighting. Stephanie argued that the restructuring constituted a special circumstance not covered by the accelerated vesting provision, despite no such exception being mentioned in the document. Marcus repeatedly emphasized the standard treatment being applied to all affected employees, as if consistency in wrongdoing somehow made it right. Patricia spoke at length about the company's challenging financial position, implying that honoring the contractual obligations would place an undue burden on TechVision. Throughout all this, Victor remained silent, his eyes rarely meeting mine. His presence, I realized, was purely symbolic, a reminder of the relationship and trust I had foolishly placed in the company and its leadership. When they finally paused, Benjamin calmly dismantled each of their arguments. He cited specific language from the documents, pointed out the absence of any exclusions for restructuring scenarios, and firmly reminded them that financial difficulty does not negate contractual obligations. Furthermore, he added, "We have reason to believe that TechVision has systematically withheld information about this provision from multiple terminated employees, which raises serious concerns about potential securities violations and breach of fiduciary duty." This statement visibly rattled them. Patricia and Marcus exchanged glances, while Stephanie's professional mask slipped momentarily, showing a flash of genuine concern. After a brief whispered consultation, Stephanie presented what they clearly considered a generous compromise. In the interest of resolving this matter amicably, TechVision is prepared to offer an enhanced severance package of 20 weeks of pay, an additional 6 weeks beyond the standard formula, in exchange for a comprehensive release that includes waiving any claims related to the stock options. The audacity of the offer was breathtaking. They were essentially offering an additional 6 weeks of salary, perhaps $15,000 before taxes, in exchange for my forfeiting stock options worth nearly $1 million. I looked directly at Patricia, the financial decision-maker in the room. "Just to be clear, you are offering me approximately $15,000 in additional severance in lieu of stock options, worth over $900,000 at current market value." Patricia had the grace to look uncomfortable. "The valuation you are suggesting is speculative. The market is volatile, and there is no guarantee." Benjamin interrupted. "My client's calculation is based on the current market price as of close of business Friday. Unless TechVision is aware of material non-public information that would significantly impact that valuation, her assessment is entirely reasonable." The implication of his statement hung in the air. If they argued that the stock was worth substantially less than the market price suggested, they would be admitting to withholding information from shareholders. Marcus attempted to regain control of the conversation. "The offer we have presented is final. We believe it is fair and addresses the concerns raised in your letter. We would need your decision by the end of the week." I glanced at Benjamin, who gave me a subtle nod indicating I should respond. Taking a deep breath, I looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes in turn. I appreciate you taking the time to meet today. However, I cannot accept an offer that so dramatically undervalues what I am contractually entitled to receive. I joined TechVision 7 years ago, believing in its mission and values. I dedicated myself to this company, often at significant personal sacrifice. All I am asking for now is what my contract explicitly guarantees. The meeting concluded shortly after with promises of further internal discussion and a commitment to respond formally within the week. As Benjamin and I walked out of the building, I felt a strange mixture of pride in having stood my ground and sadness for the broken relationship with a company I had once loved. 3 days later, the formal response arrived by courier. In 5 pages of dense legal language, TechVision rejected my claim to accelerated vesting, citing obscure provisions and strained interpretations of contract language. They maintained their offer of the enhanced severance package, but added a 48-hour deadline for acceptance. Benjamin was not surprised. "This is relatively standard procedure," he explained as we reviewed the letter in his office. "They are testing your resolve, seeing if you will back down when faced with a formal rejection. Many employees do either out of fear of legal costs or concern about industry reputation." "So what is our next step?" I asked, more determined than ever. "We escalate," Benjamin said simply. "And we consider whether this is bigger than just your individual case." With TechVision's formal rejection in hand, Benjamin and I spent the next week developing a comprehensive legal strategy. The first step was filing a formal complaint with the State Labor Board detailing the company's refusal to honor the accelerated vesting provision and providing evidence of the relevant contractual language. "This accomplishes 2 things," Benjamin explained. "First, it creates an official record of your complaint. Second, it puts additional pressure on TechVision, as Labor Board investigations can result in penalties beyond just the disputed compensation." While the Labor Board complaint proceeded, I began a more personal investigation into how widespread this practice might be. Using LinkedIn, I created a private group called Former TechVision Employees and began inviting people I knew had been affected by recent layoffs. The response was immediate and revealing. Within 3 days, 27 former employees had joined the group, and the stories they shared followed a disturbing pattern. Regardless of position or tenure, all had been offered the same standard severance package of 2 weeks per year of service. None had been informed about the accelerated vesting provision for stock options, and many had already signed the severance agreements, potentially waiving their rights to those shares. Dylan Matthews, a former senior developer who had been with the company for 4 years, was particularly vocal. "They told me explicitly that all unvested options were forfeited upon termination," he wrote in the group. "When I asked about alternatives, the HR representative said there were none. I had over 3,000 unvested shares that would have been worth over $200,000. Rebecca Torres, who had been a marketing director, shared a similar experience. The severance meeting felt rushed and pressured. They had the documents ready for signature and implied that any delay in signing might jeopardize even the basic severance payment. I signed without fully understanding what I was giving up. As the group grew and more stories emerged, Benjamin connected us with Elena Fernandez, an attorney specializing in class action lawsuits. During our initial consultation, she confirmed what we were beginning to suspect. This appears to be a systematic attempt to deny terminated employees their contractual rights. Elena said after reviewing the documentation and testimonials we had gathered, "The consistency of the approach across departments and levels suggests this was a deliberate strategy, not a series of oversights." Elena explained that a class action approach would have several advantages. It would pool resources for legal costs, increase pressure on TechVision, and potentially help employees who had already signed releases under what could be argued was false pretense or duress. With Benjamin focusing on my individual case, and Elena beginning the groundwork for a potential class action, I continued my investigation. Through the LinkedIn group, I connected with Jackson Reed, who still worked in TechVision's finance department and had been troubled by what he was witnessing. Over coffee at a cafe far from TechVision's offices, Jackson shared a disturbing insight. After the first wave of layoffs 3 months ago, there was a meeting about the financial impact, he told me nervously, glancing around the cafe. Patricia specifically mentioned that by not accelerating the vesting of options, the company was saving approximately $4.5 million in dilution. This was the smoking gun we needed, proof that the company was not just passively allowing employees to remain ignorant of their rights, but actively counting on that ignorance for financial benefit. "Is there any documentation of this meeting?" I asked, trying to contain my excitement. Jackson hesitated before pulling out his phone. "I cannot give you the full deck, but I took a screenshot of this slide." He showed me an image of a PowerPoint slide titled Restructuring Financial Benefits with a bullet point that clearly stated equity recapture from non-accelerated options, 4.5 million rupees. "Can you send me that?" I asked, already imagining Benjamin's and Elena's reactions. Jackson shook his head. "I could lose my job. But," he paused, then wrote down an email address on a napkin. "Send a blank email to this address tonight. You will receive an anonymous reply with an attachment." True to his word, when I emailed the address that evening, I received a response containing not just the screenshot, but an entire presentation deck about the restructuring with multiple references to the financial benefits of not honoring the accelerated vesting provision. The next day, as Benjamin, Elena, and I reviewed this new evidence, another unexpected development occurred. I received a message from a reporter named Kate Barnes who covered the tech industry for Tech Daily, a well-respected industry publication. "I am hearing rumors about potential legal action against TechVision related to stock options and severance practices," she wrote. "As someone recently departed from the company at a senior level, I would value your perspective. All conversations can be off the record initially." This presented both an opportunity and a risk. Public exposure could increase pressure on TechVision, but it could also potentially damage the legal process or lead to accusations that I was violating the confidentiality provisions of my employment agreement. After careful consultation with Benjamin and Elena, I agreed to speak with Kate on background, only providing general context about industry severance practices without specifically confirming or discussing my own situation or the potential legal action. Even with these limitations, the conversation was productive. Kate was already investigating similar practices at other tech companies and had developed sources within TechVision who had raised concerns about the recent layoffs. She understood the sensitivity of the situation and agreed to proceed carefully, focusing her story on the industry-wide issue while continuing to investigate the specific allegations against TechVision. By the end of the week, our multi-pronged approach was taking shape. Benjamin had formally rejected TechVision's response and filed additional documentation with the labor board. Elena had begun the process of identifying potential class members and drafting the initial class action documentation. Our LinkedIn group had grown to over 40 former employees, many eager to participate in collective action. And Kate was quietly gathering information for what could become a significant industry story. The pieces were falling into place, but TechVision remained outwardly unmoved. Their only response to Benjamin's latest communication was a brief letter from Stephanie reiterating their position and warning against potentially defamatory public statements. "They are beginning to feel the pressure," Benjamin assured me when I expressed frustration at the lack of progress. "This type of corporate stonewalling is often the last stage before a serious offer of settlement. They are hoping we will lose momentum, or that some of the potential class members will get cold feet." What he could not have anticipated was that one of those potential class members, unbeknownst to us, was about to take matters into their own hands in a way that would dramatically accelerate our timeline. The catalyst came in the form of a LinkedIn post from Michael Chen, a former TechVision engineering manager who had been laid off 3 months earlier. Michael had signed his severance agreement without realizing what he was giving up, and his anger upon learning about the accelerated vesting clause through our group was palpable. His post was simple but devastating PSA to all laid-off tech workers: check your contracts. I just discovered TechVision denied me over $350 Kelvin in stock options I was legally entitled to. They never mentioned the accelerated vesting clause in my contract and pressured me to sign away my rights. How many others has this happened to? The post went viral within hours with thousands of shares and comments from tech workers across the industry sharing similar experiences with other companies. Michael's inbox was flooded with messages, many from current and former TechVision employees. He forwarded the most significant ones to me, including several from current employees confirming Jackson's account of the deliberate strategy to save money by withholding information about vesting rights. Kate Barnes from Tech Daily reached out to Michael immediately, and then circled back to me now with a much more specific focus for her story. After consulting with Benjamin and Elena, I agreed to go on record providing Kate with copies of the relevant contract language and a statement about my experience. 3 days later, Tech Daily published Kate's comprehensive exposé on vested interests, how TechVision and other tech giants may be denying laid-off workers millions in stock compensation. The article detailed the accelerated vesting provisions common in tech company contracts, the pattern of companies failing to honor these provisions during layoffs, and the specific evidence suggesting TechVision had deliberately withheld this information as part of a cost-saving strategy. The story spread like wildfire across tech news sites, industry forums, and social media. TechVision's stock price, already weakened by the restructuring announcement, dropped 8% the day the article was published. Financial analysts began questioning the company's reported liabilities and whether they had properly accounted for potential claims from terminated employees. TechVision's initial public response was a textbook example of corporate deflection. Their PR department issued a statement expressing concern about the mischaracterization of our severance practices and claiming that all terminations have been handled in accordance with applicable laws and contractual obligations. They neither confirmed nor denied the specific allegations, instead emphasizing their commitment to treating all employees with respect during difficult transitions. This vague response only fueled further speculation and criticism. Industry commentators pointed out that the statement failed to address the specific claim about the accelerated vesting provision, and several former employees came forward publicly to share their experiences, adding credibility to the public's exposé. Original report. Behind the scenes, the impact was immediate and significant. Benjamin received a call from Stephanie Winters the morning after the article was published, requesting an urgent meeting to discuss potential resolution options. Elena reported that several other attorneys representing former TechVision employees had reached out about coordinating legal efforts. Most surprisingly, I received a direct email from Thomas Reynolds, TechVision's CEO, who had been conspicuously absent from all previous discussions. Amanda, I have just become aware of the concerns regarding our severance practices and stock option vesting procedures, he wrote. I would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you directly about your experience and how we might address any misunderstandings or shortcomings in our approach. The email struck me as either remarkably sincere or remarkably disingenuous. Either Thomas had truly been unaware of what his HR and finance departments were doing, which suggested troubling governance issues, or he was attempting to manage the public relations crisis by appearing personally engaged while still denying responsibility. Benjamin advised caution. This could be a genuine attempt to understand and resolve the situation, or it could be an attempt to separate you from the broader class of affected employees by offering an individual settlement, he warned. Let us respond that you are open to a conversation, but that your legal representation must be present. Thomas agreed to these terms, and a meeting was scheduled for the following day at Benjamin's office, a neutral location away from TechVision's headquarters. Thomas arrived alone without the corporate armor of HR directors or legal counsel, which I found both surprising and potentially significant. Thank you for agreeing to meet Amanda, he began once we were seated in Benjamin's conference room. I want to start by saying that I am deeply concerned by what I have learned over the past few days. If what has been reported is accurate, it represents a serious departure from the values and practices I believe should define TechVision. Over the next hour, Thomas claimed that he had been focused on strategic partnerships and had delegated the restructuring implementation to his executive team. He expressed shock at learning about the accelerated vesting clause and the apparent decision not to proactively inform terminated employees about their rights. I have initiated an internal investigation, he said, and have already determined that at minimum there was a significant failure in our process and communication. What I am still trying to determine is whether this was a matter of oversight or something more deliberate. Benjamin maintained a professional skepticism throughout the conversation. While we appreciate your personal engagement, Mr. Reynolds, the pattern of behavior suggests this was not merely an oversight. We have documentation indicating that the financial benefits of not honoring the accelerated vesting provision were explicitly calculated and presented to executive leadership. Thomas's expression tightened briefly before he nodded. I have seen that presentation. It was never shown to me in its original form. but it has been recovered as part of our internal investigation. I can tell you unequivocally that I would never have approved a strategy based on denying employees their contractual rights. Whether or not I believe Thomas's claim of ignorance, his next statements made clear that the public pressure was having the desired effect. I have called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning, he said. I will be recommending immediate remedial action, including honoring the accelerated vesting provision for all eligible terminated employees, regardless of whether they have signed severance agreements. I would like to resolve this situation quickly, fairly, and without the need for protracted legal proceedings. Benjamin and I exchanged glances. This was potentially everything we had been fighting for, but experience had taught us to be cautious about corporate promises, especially when made in the heat of a public relations crisis. We would need to see the specific terms of any proposed resolution, Benjamin replied, and given the collective nature of this issue, we would need assurance that all affected employees would be treated equitably. Thomas nodded. I understand. If the board approves my recommendation, I will have our legal team draft a comprehensive proposal that addresses both individual cases like Amanda's and the broader class of affected employees. I hope to have this to you within 48 hours. As the meeting concluded, I found myself in the strange position of feeling both vindicated and uncertain. The public exposure strategy had clearly worked, forcing TechVision to engage at the highest level. Yet years in corporate environments had taught me that initial conciliatory gestures did not always translate to meaningful action. Those 48 hours were tense as we waited to see whether Thomas would deliver on his promises. Meanwhile, the story continued to gain traction, with industry analysts speculating about the potential financial impact on TechVision and other tech companies that might have similar practices. True to his word, Thomas sent a comprehensive proposal to Benjamin exactly 2 days after our meeting. The terms were better than we had dared hope for. TechVision would honor the accelerated vesting provision for all employees terminated in the restructuring, regardless of whether they had signed severance agreements. They would establish a simplified claims process that would not require legal representation. And they would add a 25% premium to the value of the vested shares for employees who had already signed releases as compensation for the delay and the need to sign additional paperwork. For me personally, this meant not only receiving the full value of my unvested options, approximately $930,000 based on the current stock price, but an additional $232,500 as the premium payment. As Benjamin, Elena, and I reviewed the proposal with the core group of former employees who had been most involved in our efforts, the consensus was clear. This represented a fair and comprehensive resolution that achieved everything we had been fighting for. I did not expect them to capitulate so completely, Elena admitted during our discussion. The board must have realized that the potential legal costs and reputational damage would far exceed the cost of honoring these obligations. The formal announcement came the following day. TechVision issued a press release acknowledging inconsistencies in the communication of certain benefits during the recent restructuring and outlining the remediation plan. The release included a personal statement from Thomas expressing regret for the situation and committing to a comprehensive review of HR policies and practices to ensure alignment with company values. Industry reaction was generally positive, with analysts praising TechVision for taking responsibility and acting decisively to address the issue. The company's stock price, which had fallen nearly 15% since the controversy began, recovered about half of those losses following the announcement. For the former employees, the reactions ranged from vindication to bittersweet acceptance. Many expressed gratitude for the financial resolution while noting that the experience had permanently changed their perception of corporate loyalty and the importance of understanding their contractual rights. As for Marcus Fleming and Patricia Clark, the primary architects of the original strategy, Thomas's internal investigation resulted in both being placed on administrative leave, pending a more comprehensive review of their actions. Victor, my former director, who had remained silent throughout my termination and subsequent fight, reached out with a lukewarm apology for not being more supportive during a difficult transition. The resolution process moved quickly after the announcement. Within 2 weeks, I received confirmation of my shares being vested and the additional premium payment being processed. Similar notices went out to all eligible former employees, with dedicated support staff available to answer questions and address concerns. The story gradually faded from the headlines, replaced by new controversies and challenges in the ever-evolving tech industry. But its impact lingered both on TechVision's practices and on the industry more broadly. Several other major tech companies proactively reviewed and clarified their own policies regarding stock vesting during terminations, perhaps hoping to avoid similar controversies. For me, the experience was transformative in ways that went far beyond the financial outcome. What had begun as a personal fight for fair treatment had evolved into something larger, a collective action that helped dozens of colleagues and potentially influenced practices affecting thousands of tech workers across the industry. The final resolution with TechVision came exactly 31 days after my termination. The shares were vested as promised, and the premium payment was deposited directly to my account. The total compensation was substantially more than the original 14 weeks of severance they had offered, vindicating my decision to fight, rather than simply accept what was presented. Beyond the financial aspects, TechVision followed through on Thomas's commitment to review and reform their HR practices. Marcus Fleming was ultimately removed from his position as HR director, while Patricia Clark received a formal reprimand but remained as CFO with reduced responsibilities. The company hired an external consultant to conduct a comprehensive audit of their employment practices and compensation policies, with a particular focus on transparency and communication during workforce reductions. The most significant corporate change came in the form of a new employee rights advocate position, created specifically to ensure that employees understood their contractual rights and benefits, particularly during terminations. In a move that surprised many, Thomas reached out to ask if I would consider consulting on the development of this role, an offer I politely declined. For the broader group of affected employees, the outcomes were similarly positive. All verified claims were honored according to the terms of the settlement, with the 25% premium being paid to those who had previously signed releases. The total cost to TechVision was reported in their next quarterly filing as approximately $12.8 million, substantially more than the $4.5 million they had hoped to save through their original strategy. The class action lawsuit that Elena had been preparing was never filed, as the comprehensive settlement addressed all the concerns that would have been raised in litigation. However, the groundwork she had laid and the community we had built proved valuable in ensuring that all affected employees were aware of their rights under the settlement. On a personal level, the weeks following the resolution were a time of reflection and recovery. The intense stress of the termination and subsequent fight had taken a toll, and I gave myself permission to process the emotional impact before jumping into a new position. I took a 3-week trip to visit family, something I had rarely done during my years at TechVision, when vacation time was always subordinate to project deadlines. During this time, I also became something of an informal resource for other tech workers facing layoffs or difficult employment situations. The LinkedIn group we had created evolved from a focused effort against TechVision into a broader support network for tech professionals navigating career transitions and understanding their rights. I found unexpected fulfillment in helping others avoid the pitfalls I had encountered. When I did return to the job market, I discovered that rather than being blacklisted for standing up to TechVision, I was viewed by many potential employers as someone with integrity and the courage to advocate for what was right. Several companies specifically mentioned the Tech Daily article during interviews, expressing admiration for how I had handled the situation. 3 months after the TechVision settlement, I accepted a position as Vice President of Product Development at Horizon Systems, a mid-sized company known for its ethical business practices and employee-centered culture. During the final interview, the CEO specifically mentioned that my experience with TechVision had demonstrated qualities they valued: persistence, strategic thinking, and principled leadership. The onboarding process at Horizon was a stark contrast to my exit from TechVision. The HR team provided comprehensive documentation of all benefits and equity arrangements with clear explanations of vesting schedules and conditions. My employment contract was reviewed by Benjamin, who confirmed that it provided appropriate protections and contained no hidden pitfalls. The experience also changed how I approached my role as a leader. At TechVision, I had focused primarily on project deliverables and team performance metrics. At Horizon, while still maintaining high standards for results, I placed equal emphasis on ensuring my team members understood their rights, benefits, and opportunities for growth. I instituted regular career development discussions and created a culture where questioning policies or seeking clarification was encouraged, rather than viewed with suspicion. Perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the lasting connections formed with others who had been part of the TechVision struggle. Dylan, Rebecca, and several others became not just professional contacts, but genuine friends. We established a tradition of quarterly dinners where we could share our experiences and support each other's continued growth and success. The settlement money itself provided a level of financial security I had not previously experienced. After setting aside funds for taxes, I established an emergency fund that would cover a full year of expenses, made a long-delayed down payment on a house, and created a portfolio of diversified investments to provide long-term stability. A portion was also set aside for a small foundation supporting tech education for underrepresented groups, a way of creating positive impact from what had begun as a negative experience. Looking back on the entire experience from the perspective of 18 months later, I can see how it fundamentally changed my relationship with corporate employment. I no longer view company loyalty as something to be given unconditionally, but as a two-way relationship that must be based on mutual respect and transparency. I have become more diligent about understanding the terms of my employment and more willing to advocate for myself and others when necessary. The experience also taught me about the power of collective action. What began as my individual fight against perceived injustice became more effective and more meaningful when it expanded to include others facing similar situations. Together, we were able to achieve an outcome that would have been difficult for any of us to secure alone. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult or uncertain, is ultimately worth the struggle. The easiest path would have been to accept the initial severance offer, sign the release, and walk away. That would have avoided weeks of stress, legal consultations, and confrontational meetings. But it also would have meant not only accepting less than I was entitled to, but allowing a system to continue that was taking advantage of other employees as well. If you are facing a similar situation in your own career, I encourage you to take the time to truly understand your rights and the specific terms of your employment. Do not assume that what you are told by HR or management is the complete picture, or that initial offers represent the best or only outcome available to you. Seek appropriate professional advice. Connect with others who may be in similar situations and be prepared to advocate firmly but professionally for what you believe is right. In the end, this is not just about stock options or severance packages. It is about creating workplaces where transparency, fairness, and mutual respect are the foundation of the relationship between companies and the people who dedicate their time and talents to them. By standing up for these principles, even in difficult circumstances, we contribute to positive change that extends far beyond our individual situations. Have you ever had to stand up against unfair treatment at work? I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story helped you understand your workplace rights better, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life career insights. Share this video with anyone who might be facing similar challenges. Remember, knowledge is power, especially when it comes to protecting your financial future. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you success and fairness in all your professional endeavors.